In this lecture, we're going to be talking about some of the different theories and researchers when it comes to the field of human sexuality. So first, we'll talk about some theories. So basically, what is a theory? Before we get started describing the different theories, you need to know what a theory is. It's a set of assumptions. Basically, it's a way of looking at something, some phenomenon, a way of understanding something that you're studying. So there are theories in all kinds of different aspects of psychology and child development, and even things like mathematics have theories, which basically someone came up with an idea of how to explain a concept or how to look at something. And so then we see human sexuality through all of these different theories. So the first one that we're going to get into is the psychoanalytic theory, and this basically came from Sigmund Freud. That Freud did have some other people that he worked with, some people that followed his thinking. So he's not the only one, but he's the main one that really created this theory. So the idea behind psychoanalytic theory is that our behaviors come from these internal drives and early experiences. And one of the reasons why we were talking about Freud in this class is because his theory was very based in sexuality. The libido was a really important part of his theory. And he was very controversial at his time because he had these stages that actually applied to infants and children, where he was talking about them in kind of a way where they would experience sexual pleasure. And that really was a very different way of looking at things than anybody else had ever done before. So he has a few different concepts. He's got the id, ego, superego, which is this kind of all these forces within us that are the id and the superego are these opposite, drives, and then the ego is kind of the balance of the two. And you can study more about that aspect of things in your textbook. But these developmental stages, oral, anal, phallic, latency, and genital, those were the stages that he said that an infant and a child would go through as they're developing. Basically, he was saying that if something kind of went wrong during one of these stages, that it could create a fixation, which then led to a lot of what his later research in human sexuality was. He would say that if someone was having some kind of sexual dysfunction or a problem, that would go back to a fixation in one of these stages. So he was very about these internal drives and early experiences affecting later behaviors. And his theory was difficult to test, difficult to replicate. He basically just did a lot of interviews on his patients. And so it came from a place of people who were having an issue with something, because people were visiting a psychiatrist. And so a lot of the flaw in his theory is that it came from people who were not in a healthy place. So it doesn't really describe the normal sexual responses. It's more of an abnormal theory. So Freud has some controversy surrounding his theory. Next one is behaviorism. This is B.F. Skinner, and again, there are other behaviorists, but he was really the one behind this idea of operant conditioning. So in behaviorism, the idea is that behaviors come from some sort of external programming of a reward or a punishment. So if you've ever taken a child development class, you're probably familiar with behaviorism as a child development theory, but it can also apply to human sexuality in that the behaviors that people do are either going to be reinforced or punished. So if you have a good experience with something, then you'll want to continue doing that action that caused the reward. Or if you have a bad experience with something, then that should reduce or eliminate the behavior. So humans in this theory are sort of programmed to, if something good happens, then they want to continue that action. If something bad happens, then they don't, or they have problems with it. So it's a very much environmental influence on the person. There's really nothing coming from within on this one. There's not a thought process or, anything like that. It's all something external acting on a person that that they really don't have control over. Somebody could program them to be a certain way just based on a reward or punishment. Okay, the next one is learning theory. This is Albert Bandura. It's similar to behaviorism, but he also incorporated that people do have internal thoughts and feelings, and that does play some part in how our behaviors are developed. So he's sort of a mix of what we just saw with the behaviorism, but then he also added in sort of starting to get into more of the cognitive, which we'll get onto soon here in a couple slides. So one of his big principles of learning theory is that we learn how to have our gender roles or our different ways of acting or our different thoughts and feelings about sexuality based on models that we would see. So our parents would show us examples. We would learn things by watching our family members or our peers. So basically, we're learning how to look at things based on someone that we're watching, and we're modeling them. The next one is the humanistic. This is Abraham Maslow. So the whole idea behind this theory is that all humans are trying to achieve self-actualization. So if you see this little triangular chart here, this is the hierarchy of needs, is what it was called. So at the bottom is the physiological needs. So this would be things like just basic food and water just for survival. And you get all the way to the top is so-called self-actualization. And this would be like your full potential. We're going to try to realize the best of the best as far as things like our talents or, being a service to the community and just things about humanity itself. It's all about personal growth and reaching for your highest potential. So humanistic behavior comes from this desire to achieve that self-actualization. Then we've got cognitive theory, and the rest of these theories don't really have one specific person that's really responsible for them. They're just sort of an idea that a lot of different people have contributed to. So cognitive theory is all about the brain. So it's how we think about situations, how we process information. It's about our perception of things, and it's all about thinking and the brain. So if you see anything about, a thought process or something about that has something to do with thinking, it's probably going to be a cognitive theory. And the next two are kind of similar. They get a little bit confusing, but biological theory is really on like a medical emphasis. So if we were looking at like a sexual dysfunction problem, for example, someone from a biological theory would just want to treat that with a prescription or maybe a surgery. It's all about the physiological body systems. There's no social or psychological aspect to this. So if someone was having a sexual dysfunction, a biological theorist would say, well, it's probably because their hormone levels are out of balance, or, they need some kind of procedure or medication. Whereas some of the other ones would look at more of, the psychological reasons or the behavioral reasons or the social reasons. So the biological is very much medical, just basic physiology. And then evolutionary theory is, it's more about passing on your gene pool, basically, survival of the fittest type of thing. So when we look at different traits of human sexuality, why do we do certain things? It's this sort of evolutionary instinct to want to reproduce to keep the species alive, basically. So that's where we would get into evolutionary theory. It's sort of based in evolution as far as, humans being evolved from monkeys or whatever. But really, when we're looking at it in the terms of human sexuality, it's this idea of passing on your genes to the next generation. And then the next one is sociological theory. And this one is all about our culture and how our behaviors are influenced by things like the media or social norms, or even our family. Family plays a big part in our social modeling and things like that. So we would look at things like religion and school education systems. We would look at our culture in general and how we see things in the media and how our society views things. And that is what would determine our behavior according to this theory. And then feminist theory comes from this idea that a lot of the other theories and a lot of the other research that has been done has been from a male perspective. And it's this idea of this power struggle between the genders. So from the feminist point of view, the male has had a whole lot more power in sexual relationships and in all kinds of other things as well. And so the feminist researchers would look at our behaviors from a female perspective and look at the gender roles, trying to gain more equality and see things from both perspectives rather than just looking at the world from the male point of view. We'll get into a little more detail on that kind of thing when we're talking about some of the researchers also. And then queer theory focuses on LGBTQ rights. So this is the most recent one, and we've seen a lot in the news recently about these types of things. Lots of laws being passed, lots of debates going on. And this one really just wants to kind of broaden people's views of what sexuality is, what should be acceptable, not looking at things from that this is a problem kind of behavior, but we're just more open and accepting of all different kinds of sexuality.